Victor Hale slammed a document onto the table in front of the entire town and pointed straight at Clara, the mail-order bride who had arrived at Silverleaf Ranch with nothing but a worn suitcase and a faded dress, and declared, "This woman poisoned that household. She manipulated a grieving man, and if you don't remove her from that property, I will do it myself." The room went silent. Every eye turned to her. These were the same people who had laughed at her the day she stepped off the train. The same people who had whispered she was only there for his money. Now they were waiting to see if she would break. She didn't. Hit like, drop your city or country in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. And subscribe so you never miss what happens next. The train was 40 minutes late, which gave the people of Harding Creek plenty of time to decide they already didn't like her. They gathered at the platform the way people gather for a hanging, not because they wanted to see it, but because they couldn't quite look away. Women in good dresses stood with their arms crossed. Men leaned against fence posts pretending to check their pocket watches. A few of the ranch hands from neighboring properties had ridden in just to see Nathaniel Cross make a fool of himself, and they weren't bothering to hide it. "Mail-order bride," someone said behind Mabel Greer's shoulder, and the way the woman said it made it sound like something she'd scraped off her boot. Mabel didn't respond. She just kept her eyes on the tracks. Nathaniel Cross stood apart from the crowd, which was where he always stood. He was a tall man, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of face that had been weathered by years of work rather than years of worry. He'd buried a wife. He'd kept a ranch running through 2 bad winters, and 1 drought that had broken 3 of his neighbors. He wasn't the sort of man who looked like he needed anything from anyone, which was exactly why people were so interested in the fact that he'd sent away for a wife. His foreman, a man named Dawes, who had been with him for 11 years, stood about 6 feet to his left and kept his opinion to himself. Dawes was good at keeping his opinions to himself. It was one of the reasons Nathaniel valued him. "Train's coming," Dawes said. "I can hear it," Nathaniel said. They stood there. The crowd shifted. The train came around the bend trailing steam and the smell of coal smoke, and the platform filled with the noise of arrival. Doors banging, conductors calling, the groan of brakes working against iron wheels. People got off. A family with 3 children and too much luggage. A drummer in a suit that had been expensive once. 2 cowboys who looked like they'd been riding inside a cattle car the whole way. An older woman in black who no one came to meet. And then, near the end, a young woman in a faded blue dress stepped down from the second-to-last car carrying a single suitcase. It was the kind of suitcase that had been repaired twice and showed it. She stood on the platform and looked around with the careful, measuring expression of someone who'd learned not to show too much on her face before she understood what she was walking into. She was not what they expected. No one said it out loud, but the silence said it for them. Whatever vision they'd built, of a desperate woman dolled up in borrowed finery, eager to latch onto a wealthy rancher, it didn't match the person standing in front of them. She was plain, not ugly, but plain in a way that suggested she'd never had the time or money to be anything else. Her dress was clean but worn thin at the elbows. Her hair was pinned back without decoration. She carried herself with a stillness that might have been nerves, or might have been something harder than that. Nathaniel walked toward her. The crowd watched. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Mr. Cross." She held out her hand to shake, not to be held, which caught him off guard. Her grip was firm. "I appreciate you meeting me. Wasn't going to leave you standing here alone," he said. "I've stood in worse places alone," she said. "But thank you." Behind him, he heard Mabel Greer say something to the woman beside her, and he didn't catch the words, but he caught the tone. He didn't turn around. "My wagon's this way," he said. She picked up her suitcase before he could offer to take it, which was the second thing that surprised him. The ride to Silverleaf took an hour on a good day. It took longer that afternoon because one of the rear wheels had developed a rattle that Dawes kept threatening to fix and hadn't. The road wound up through scrub country before the valley opened out, and the ranch came into view. The main house, the bunkhouse, the outbuildings, the cottonwoods that Nathaniel's wife had insisted on planting 8 years ago and that were now tall enough to mean something. Clara sat beside him on the wagon bench and looked at it the way she'd looked at the town, carefully, without giving anything away. "It's bigger than I expected," she said. "The land or the house?" "Both." He didn't say anything to that. After a moment, she said, "The advertisement didn't mention children." He'd known this was coming. He'd known it since he wrote the letter and deliberately left that part vague, and he wasn't proud of it. "I have 2 daughters. Eliza is 11. Rose is 7. She turned to look at him. "That's not something you leave out." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." "Why did you?" He kept his eyes on the road. "Because I needed someone who would actually come." She was quiet for long enough that he thought she might be deciding whether to ask him to turn the wagon around. Finally, she said, "What happened to their mother?" "Fever. 3 years ago." Another pause. "I'm sorry." "Are you angry?" he asked, about the omission. She thought about it like she was genuinely considering the question rather than just managing him. "I'm not sure yet," she said. "Ask me again in a week." The girls were waiting on the porch when the wagon pulled up, which meant someone had told them to wait there. Eliza stood with her arms folded in an imitation of her father that might have been funny under different circumstances. Rose was half hidden behind her sister, one hand gripping Eliza's sleeve, watching with huge dark eyes. Nathaniel climbed down and said, "Girls, this is Miss Whitmore. She's come to stay with us." Eliza said nothing. Rose said, very quietly, "She's not Mama." "Rose," Nathaniel's voice was sharp. "It's all right," Claire said. She was already on the ground, suitcase in hand. She didn't crouch down to their level in that false, friendly way adults sometimes did with children. She just looked at them the same way she'd looked at everything else. Steady and honest. "You're right," she said to Rose. "I'm not your mama. I'm not trying to be. My name is Clara, and I don't expect you to like me straight off. That seems like a reasonable way to feel." Rose stared at her. Eliza's arms stayed folded. "Is there somewhere I can put my things?" Claire asked Nathaniel. "Mrs. Higgins will show you," he said. Mrs. Higgins was the housekeeper, a compact woman in her 50s with gray hair and the expression of someone who had seen everything and been impressed by very little. She appeared in the doorway and looked Clara up and down in a single efficient sweep. "This way," she said, without warmth. Clara followed her inside. Nathaniel stood in the yard with his daughters for a moment. Eliza unfolded her arms long enough to say, "She looks poor." "That's not something we say," he told her. "It's true." "So is a lot of things," he said. "Doesn't mean we say them." He went inside after Clara. Eliza looked at Rose. Rose looked back. "I don't like her," Eliza said. Rose thought about it. "She talked to me like I was a regular person." "So?" "So Mrs. Higgins doesn't do that." Eliza had no answer for that. They stood on the porch a little longer before going in. Mrs. Higgins showed Clara to a room at the end of the upper hallway that had a window overlooking the back of the property and a bed with a quilt that had been washed so many times it had gone soft. The room was clean. It was also clearly the worst room in the house, and they both knew it. "Dinner is at 6, Mrs. Higgins said. "I'll need help in the kitchen starting at 5. "I'll be there," Claire said. "The girls take their breakfast at 7. They're not easy in the mornings." "Neither am I," Claire said. "We'll work it out." Mrs. Higgins looked at her again with that appraising expression. "Mr. Cross is a busy man. He doesn't have time to manage household problems." "I understand." "The last woman who came—" Mrs. Higgins stopped. "What happened to her?" "She left," the housekeeper said flatly. "After 4 days, said she couldn't manage the girls and the isolation." She paused. "And the previous one left after 2. Clara set her suitcase on the bed. "How many have there been?" "You're the 3rd. Mrs. Higgins' voice was careful and did not invite sympathy. "I'm not saying this to discourage you. I'm saying it so you understand what you've walked into." "I appreciate that," Clara said. The housekeeper left without another word. Clara sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the sounds of the house settling around her. The creak of the floorboards, the distant clatter from the kitchen, a child's voice somewhere down the hall asking something she couldn't make out. She looked at her suitcase. Inside it was one other dress, a pair of worn boots, a small knife she'd carried since she was 17, and a bundle of letters tied with kitchen string that she hadn't been able to throw away, even when she'd had to sell almost everything else. She didn't unpack. Not yet. She went to the window and looked out at the land. Boss. Dinner that first evening was a study in careful avoidance. Nathaniel sat at the head of the table and said little. Eliza ate with deliberate efficiency and didn't look up. Rose kept glancing at Clara from under her lashes, the way children do when they're curious but don't want to be caught at it. Clara asked Rose about a small, carved horse she'd noticed on the windowsill in the hallway. It's mine, Rose said, guarded. I could see that. Did someone make it for you? Papa made it. Rose looked at Nathaniel. He used to make things. Nathaniel cleared his throat and moved a piece of bread around his plate. He doesn't anymore, Eliza said. There was something in her voice that was past angry. It was the flat, resigned note of a child who had already stopped expecting things to change. Clara looked at Nathaniel. He didn't meet her eyes. What kind of wood? Clara asked Rose. What? The horse. What kind of wood is it? Rose thought about it. I don't know. It's kind of yellow. Could be Osage orange, Clara said. My father used to work with it. It's very hard wood, doesn't rot easily. Takes a long time to carve something fine from it. Nathaniel looked up then, just for a second. Rose said, Did your father make things too? He made furniture mostly, tables, chairs. He wasn't very good at animals. A pause. He tried once. He said it was supposed to be a dog, but it looked more like a boot with ears. Rose made a sound that was almost a laugh before she caught herself. Eliza looked up. The dinner continued. After the girls had gone to bed, Nathaniel found Clara in the kitchen, washing the dishes that the ranch cook usually left until morning. He stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment before she noticed him. You don't need to do that, he said. I know, she said. I don't mind. He came in and sat at the kitchen table. This was not something he typically did, and he felt the strangeness of it but didn't leave. The girls weren't welcoming, he said. They were honest, Clara said. I prefer that. Eliza can be difficult. She's protecting her sister. Clara didn't stop working. And her father, probably. It's what older children do when they feel like they have to. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. You seem to know a lot about that. I was the older child, she said, after our mother died. He hadn't known that. The letters they'd exchanged had covered practical things. Her experience managing a household, her age, her willingness to relocate. Neither of them had said much about the rest of it. How old were you? He asked. 14, she said. My brother was 9. She paused with her hands in the water. He's gone now, too. Different reasons. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. She went back to washing. I'm not telling you for sympathy. I'm telling you because you asked, and I think we should be honest with each other if this is going to work. Nathaniel leaned forward with his elbows on the table. What do you think we need to be honest about? She turned to look at him. You didn't mention the children in your advertisement because you thought I'd say no. I told you, I know what you told me. I'm not relitigating it. She dried her hands on the towel by the basin. I want you to understand that I'm still here. I saw the house. I met the girls. I understand what I've come into. And I'm still here. He studied her. Why? Because this place is real, she said. And I needed something real. She said it simply, without drama, and that was what made it land differently than he expected. He'd braced for something more calculated. A performance of virtue, maybe, or a bid for sympathy. This was neither. He stood up to leave. At the doorway he stopped. Can you ride? He asked. Not well, she said, but I learned quickly. Dawes can take you around the property tomorrow morning if you want to see it. I'd like that, she said. He nodded and went to bed. Doubt. The next 3 days passed in a way that felt like the ranch was waiting to see what she would do. The servants, 2 of them, a girl named Hattie, who was barely 16, and a ranch hand named Clem, who helped with the heavier indoor work, watched Clara with the particular attention of people who expected her to fail and wanted to be there when it happened. They weren't cruel about it. They were just careful. They kept their distance. They didn't offer help she hadn't asked for. They answered her questions with the minimum required and went back to their business. Mrs. Higgins was harder to read. She was efficient and correct in all her dealings with Clara, and she offered no warmth and no hostility either. She simply watched. On the second morning, Rose came into the kitchen before sunrise and found Clara already there, learning the stove. "Why are you up?" Rose asked. "Couldn't sleep," Clara said. "You?" "I sometimes get scared when it's dark." Clara moved a chair closer to the fire and said, "Sit here then. I'm going to make biscuits. You can help if you want." Rose looked at the chair, then she sat in it. "I don't know how to make biscuits." "Neither do I exactly. I know the general idea. We'll figure it out." The biscuits came out lopsided and too brown on the bottom. Rose thought this was hilarious. By the time Eliza came down for breakfast and found her younger sister laughing at a tray of failed baking, her face did something complicated before it went carefully neutral again. She took a biscuit without being offered one. "They're burned," she said. "On the bottom," Clara agreed. "The tops are fine. Try it upside down." Eliza looked at the biscuit. She turned it over. She ate it. Whoa. On the third day, Dawes took Clara out on horseback to see the eastern boundary of the property. The horse they gave her was old and gentle, which she appreciated, though she didn't say so out loud. Dawes was not a talkative man, which suited her. They rode for nearly an hour before he said, "You're going to outlast the others." "Is that a question?" she asked. "No," he said. "It's an observation." "How can you tell?" He thought about it. "The others talk too much about what they expected. You don't seem to expect anything." "I found that expectations cause most of the trouble," she said. Dawes nodded like she'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. He pointed out the eastern fence line and the creek that marked the southern boundary, and the ridge in the distance where the land started rising toward what he called the high pasture. He talked about the ranch in the way someone talks about something they care about, practically, with specific details, not with sentiment. When they were riding back, he said, without looking at her, "Victor Hale's been asking about the water rights on this property." Clara looked at him. "Who's Victor Hale?" "Man who owns most of what's east of us. He's been buying up land for 3 years. Most of the ranchers who sold didn't want to, but they ran out of ways to say no." A pause. "Mr. Cross hasn't run out of ways yet." "Does Mr. Cross know you're telling me this?" "No." "Why are you telling me?" Dawes was quiet for a moment. "Because you're going to be here a while," he said, "and you should know what you've walked into." Clara looked out at the land around her, the scrub grass and the rocky outcrops, and the sky that went on so long it made her feel small and solid at the same time. "People keep saying that to me," she said. "Maybe that means it's true," Dawes said. They rode back to the ranch without talking, which was not uncomfortable. It was on the fourth evening that the first real trouble started. Nathaniel had been in town for the day, a meeting with the bank, then another with the county land office that Dawes said hadn't gone well, and that Nathaniel wouldn't discuss when he came home. He ate dinner in 4 minutes and disappeared into his office and didn't come out. Clara was mending one of Rose's dresses by lamplight in the sitting room when she heard Eliza's voice from the hallway, sharp and fast, talking to someone she couldn't see. Then footsteps. Then Eliza appeared in the doorway. "Hattie says you went through the linen closet," Eliza said. "I reorganized it," Clara said. "It was hard to find anything." "That's my mother's linen closet." Clara put down the dress. "I understand it was your mother's." "You don't belong in there. Eliza, you don't belong here." The girl's voice had gone tight, holding something that was trying to come out faster than she wanted it to. "You came here for his money. Everybody in town says so. You're not going to get it, and then you're going to leave like the others, and Rose is going to cry for weeks, and I'm the one who has to deal with it." Clara sat for a moment without speaking. In the hallway, the sound of someone listening very carefully. Rose, probably. "You're right that I don't know what I'm going to do," Clara said. "I've only been here 4 days, but I'll tell you what I came here for if you want to hear it." Eliza's chin was up. "I already know." "You know what people in town say," Clara said. "That's not the same as knowing." She folded her hands in her lap. "I came from Ohio. My family had land there. Not as much as this, but enough. We worked it for 20 years. And then a man with better lawyers took it because he found a way to say the title wasn't clean. My father fought it for 3 years. He died fighting it. She said this plainly, the way you say a thing that is true and terrible and that you've had enough time to stop crying about, mostly. After that, I had nothing. I was going to lose the roof I was sleeping under. I answered your father's advertisement because I needed to go somewhere and build something, and I didn't have any other options that were honest. Eliza's expression had shifted, almost against her will. I didn't come for his money, Clara said. If I'd wanted money by dishonest means, there were easier paths than this. She picked up the mending again. But I understand why you don't believe me. You've had 2 women come here and leave, and I'm the third, and there's no reason to think I'll be different. I can't prove it to you with words. I can only stay. Eliza stood in the doorway for another moment. The linen closet was my mother's, she said, but the heat was gone from it. I'll ask before I touch anything of hers again, Clara said. That's fair. Eliza left without responding. 3 seconds later, a small figure came around the door frame. Rose. She had definitely been listening. Is it true? Rose asked. About your family's land? Yes, Clara said. That's really sad. It was, Clara agreed. But sad things end usually, or you get used to carrying them. Rose came and sat on the footstool near Clara's chair. She didn't say anything. She just sat there, the way children sometimes do when they've decided that a place is safe without being able to explain why. Clara went back to her mending. Outside, the wind had picked up, moving through the cottonwoods with a sound like water. That night, after Rose was in bed, Nathaniel came out of his office. He found Clara at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold in front of her, and a look on her face that he couldn't read in the lamplight. Eliza talked to you? He asked. We sorted it out, she said. She's protecting what's hers, Clara said. You don't have to apologize for that. He sat down across from her. He looked tired in a way that went past the day's work. The bank meeting didn't go well, he said, though she hadn't asked. Dawes mentioned something about Victor Hale. Nathaniel's expression changed. It went quieter and harder. What did Dawes say? Just that he's been acquiring land, that he's been asking about the water rights here. He can ask all he wants, Nathaniel said. The water rights on this property go back 20 years and they're clean. I've had 2 lawyers look at them. Does he know that? He knows, Nathaniel said. He just doesn't care. He said it with the weariness of someone who had already spent too much energy on a problem that kept returning. Clara watched him and thought about her father, about the particular exhaustion of fighting something that keeps coming at you from a direction you can't fully defend. What does he want exactly? He wants me to sell. He's been wanting it for 2 years. Nathaniel rubbed one hand across his face. This water, the creek and the aquifer underneath it, it feeds 3 properties, mine and 2 others to the south. If Hale gets Silverleaf, he controls all of it. And the other 2 ranchers? They're smaller operations. If I go, they'll go. They don't have the resources to fight him without me. He looked at his hands on the table. I'm not going to sell. I want that clear. I didn't ask you to, Clara said. He looked up. I'm just trying to understand what we're dealing with, she said. He studied her for a moment. That word, we, had come out of her naturally, without performance, and he didn't know what to do with that. He wasn't sure he was ready for anyone to use that word in this house. It's late, he said. It is, she agreed. He stood up. At the door he stopped, which was becoming a habit with him. You said earlier this week that you needed something real, he said. What did you mean by that? Clara looked at her cold tea. I meant that I'd been told a lot of things that weren't what they appeared to be. By people I trusted. By people I didn't know well enough not to trust. She looked at him. I needed a place where the ground was what it looked like, even if the ground was hard. He nodded slowly. Good night, Mr. Cross, she said. Nathaniel, he said. If you're going to be here. She looked at him. Good night, Nathaniel. He went to bed. Clara sat at the kitchen table for a while longer with her cold tea, listening to the cottonwoods and thinking about ground that was what it looked like, and whether she'd found it, and whether it would hold. She didn't have answers yet, but for the first time in a long time, she thought that maybe looking for them was enough. The wind moved through the yard outside, and inside the house, everyone slept. The morning after that conversation in the kitchen, Clara woke up to find a dead crow on the doorstep. She almost stepped on it. She'd come down before sunrise the way she'd taken to doing, moving quietly through the hall in her boots so she wouldn't wake the girls. And she opened the front door, and there it was, laid out with its wings spread, centered on the top step like someone had placed it deliberately, which they had. A dead bird doesn't arrange itself. She stood there for a moment looking at it in the gray pre-dawn light. Then she picked it up by one wing, carried it around the side of the house, and buried it in the soft earth near the fence line. She washed her hands at the pump, dried them on her apron, and went back inside to start the kitchen fire. She didn't mention it to anyone, but she didn't stop thinking about it either. Hattie came in an hour later and found Clara already deep into breakfast preparation, and something in the girl's expression when she looked at the front door, a quick checking glance, told Clara that Hattie knew what had been there and had expected to find it still there. Whether she'd put it there herself or just known about it, Clara couldn't say. She filed it away. "Good morning, Hattie," she said. "Morning," Hattie said, and went to her work. They moved around each other in the kitchen with careful efficiency and said nothing more about it. Nathaniel left for the north pasture before the girls were up, which was his habit on weekdays. He had a ranch to run, and the ranch didn't wait for domestic arrangements to settle themselves. Clara understood this. She didn't need him underfoot. What she needed was to learn the rhythms of the place fast enough to be useful rather than just present. She spent the morning with Mrs. Higgins going through the household accounts, which told her several things at once. The ranch was solvent, more than solvent actually, which surprised her given the 2 bad winters Dawes had mentioned. Nathaniel had managed the finances with the same focused stubbornness he seemed to bring to everything else. But the household itself had been running without real management for close to 3 years. Things had gone unordered, unrepaired, unnoticed. A woman who was paying attention could see it in the ledgers. The gaps where decisions hadn't been made, the places where money had been spent in ways that didn't make sense because nobody was tracking the bigger picture. Mrs. Higgins watched her reading through the books with her arms crossed and the expression of someone waiting to be told they'd done something wrong. "This isn't a criticism," Clara said without looking up. "You've been managing all of this alone. That's not one person's job." Mrs. Higgins was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Cross didn't want interference in the household accounts after Mrs. Cross passed." "I understand." Clara turned a page. "I'm not going to go over his head, but some of these supply orders need consolidating, and there are 2 repair items here that have been listed as pending for over a year. That costs more than fixing them would have." "I know that," Mrs. Higgins said stiffly. "I know you know. You've been trying to manage it with what authority he gave you." Clara closed the ledger and looked at the housekeeper. "I'd like to take over the household accounts. Not to change anything without your input. You know this place better than I do, but there needs to be someone making decisions." Mrs. Higgins considered her. The appraisal was slower this time, more careful. "The last woman who came wanted to redecorate the parlor," she said. "First week." "I don't care about the parlor," Clara said. "The one before that wanted to dismiss Hattie." "Hattie stays," Clara said. "She works hard." Something shifted in Mrs. Higgins' face. Not warmth, not yet, but the absence of a certain resistance. "I'll show you the storage inventory," she said. "It hasn't been done properly since spring." "Good," Clara said. "Let's start there." That afternoon brought the first real test with the girls. Rose found Clara in the garden, what had been a garden once, and was now mostly overgrowth and the stubborn remnants of plants that refused to quit. Clara was on her knees in the dirt trying to determine what was salvageable and what needed to come out entirely. "What are you doing?" Rose asked from the garden's edge. "Trying to figure out if there's anything worth saving in here," Clara said. Rose came closer and looked at the tangle of dead stems and persistent green shoots pressing up through the mess. "Mama planted this." "I know," Clara said. "Mrs. Higgins told me." She sat back on her heels. "I'm not going to rip it all out. I just want to see what's still alive." Rose crouched down next to her with the natural ease of a child for whom crouching was still comfortable. She pointed at a cluster of low leaves near the fence. Those come up every year, even when nobody does anything. What are they? I don't know. They have little purple flowers in summer. Might be salvia, Clara said. It's tough, doesn't need much. She brushed some dead material away from the base of the plants. The stems underneath were green. Still alive. Good. Rose picked up a twig from the ground and poked at the dirt thoughtfully. Why do you want to fix the garden? Because it's here and it could be better, Clara said. And because your mother took the trouble to plant things, and that deserves some respect. Rose looked at her sideways. Eliza says you're going to leave. Eliza's preparing herself, Clara said. In case I do. That's smart. Are you going to leave? Clara thought about giving a reassuring answer, the kind adults give children when they want the conversation to be over. She decided against it. I don't plan to, she said, but I've learned not to make promises about things I can't fully control. What I can tell you is that I'm not looking for a reason to go. Rose poked the dirt some more. Eliza cried for 2 weeks after the second woman left. She didn't think I knew, but I could hear her at night. Clara felt the specific, dull weight of that land on her. She didn't say anything immediately. She went back to clearing around the base of the salvias. That won't happen again because of me, she said finally. That much I can promise. Rose seemed to accept this. She stayed in the garden for another 20 minutes, not helping exactly, but present in the way children are present when they've decided something matters. When she finally got up to go back inside, she said, The purple flowers smell good, in case you were wondering. I'll remember that, Clara said. Eliza came that evening with a different kind of test. She appeared in the doorway of the room Clara used as a small sitting space and held out a torn dress, one of her own, the hem ripped halfway around and a seam opened at the side. She held it with the stiff arm of someone who wanted something but didn't want to have to ask. Mrs. Higgins usually fixes these, she said, but she's got the headache. I can fix it, Clara said. Eliza didn't move from the doorway. Do you know how? Well enough. Clara held out her hand. Eliza came in and gave her the dress, then stood there with her hands at her sides. She clearly intended to watch, which was fine. Let her watch. Clara threaded a needle and started on the hem. She worked with the efficient movements of someone who had mended a lot of things without the luxury of doing it slowly. After a few minutes, Eliza sat down in the chair across from her, not asked, but not unwelcome. How did it tear? Clara asked. I was climbing the fence in the south pasture and it caught. What were you doing at the south fence? Looking for the colt. He gets out sometimes through a gap in the lower rail. Eliza paused. Did you tell Papa? I haven't seen your father since morning, Clara said, and it's not my place to report on you. Eliza considered this. The other women always told him things. What kinds of things? Just things. Trying to make him like them more, I think, by telling him how much they'd done or what we'd been doing. She picked at the edge of her sleeve. It felt like being watched. I'm not here to watch you, Clara said. I have enough to do. She finished the hem and started on the side seam. Eliza watched her hands. You're fast, Eliza said. I've had a lot of practice. Clara didn't elaborate, and Eliza didn't push. They sat in a silence that wasn't quite comfortable but wasn't hostile either. The kind of silence that exists between two people who are still figuring out what the other one is. When she was done, Clara shook out the dress and handed it back. Eliza inspected it. The repair was invisible. She looked up. Thank you, she said, which clearly cost her something. Any time, Clara said, and meant it. 3 days later, Clem, the ranch hand who helped with indoor work, left the back door unlocked overnight. This in itself was not unusual. What was unusual was that when Clara came down in the morning, she found the pantry latch open and half the cured pork missing from the shelf. Not fallen, not misplaced, taken. She could see where the wrapping had been cut. She mentioned it to Mrs. Higgins, who went pale in a way that suggested this wasn't the first time something had gone sideways, and she knew more about the landscape of this particular problem than she'd said. Has this happened before? Clara asked. Small things, Mrs. Higgins said carefully. I wasn't sure. Who else has access to the back of the house at night? Mrs. Higgins' expression went carefully blank. Anyone who knows where Clem leaves the key. Clara looked at her steadily. And who would that be? Ranch hands come and go, Mrs. Higgins said. Some of them know the property better than they should. This was not a direct answer. Clara decided not to push it yet. She went to Nathaniel that evening. He was in his office going over maps, land surveys by the look of them, spread across his desk with weights holding the corners down. He looked up when she knocked. Something's wrong, he said, reading her face before she spoke. Maybe. I want to show you something. She laid out what she'd found and what Mrs. Higgins had said, and let him draw his own conclusions. He listened without interrupting, which she'd noticed was how he listened to things that mattered. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Clem's been with us for 2 years. I know. You think he left the door open on purpose? I think someone wanted access to this house, she said. Whether Clem did it deliberately or just left an opportunity that someone else took advantage of, I don't know yet. But it wasn't an accident. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Hale's name keep coming up in your thinking? Doesn't it in yours? He brought his gaze back down. He's tried subtler things than theft, he said. He spread a story last winter that the water on this property was carrying something that made cattle sick. Complete fabrication. Cost me 2 potential buyers for a herd I needed to sell. Did it work? Slowed things down. People in this town believe what they want to believe when it confirms something they already think. He picked up a pencil and set it down again. Hale knows that. He's very good at finding what people already want to think and giving it a reason. Clara heard the particular weight in that and understood it wasn't just about the town. What do they want to think about me? She asked. He met her eyes. That you came for money and you'll leave when you don't get enough of it fast enough. And does Hale know that's what people think? He knows everything people think. That's what makes him dangerous. He paused. He came by the ranch last month before you arrived. Offered me a very generous price. I told him to get off my land. He didn't like that. No, he's not used to it. Clara thought about the crow on the doorstep. She still hadn't mentioned it. Now she did. Nathaniel's expression went very still when she told him. You should have told me, he said. I wanted to see if there would be more, she said. I didn't want to cause alarm over one incident. It is alarming, he said. Yes, she agreed, but not surprising. And I'd rather understand the pattern before I react to it. He looked at her with the particular expression she'd noticed he used when she said something that didn't fit his expectations, like he was recalibrating. I'll talk to Clem, he said, and I'll have Dawes do a check of the property lines. If Hale's sending someone onto my land, don't move too fast, Clara said. He frowned. Why? Because if whoever's watching this place sees you react, they'll know someone talked. And then you lose your advantage, which is that they think they haven't been noticed yet. She paused. My father made that mistake. He showed his hand too early, and Hale, the man who took our land, he used it. Nathaniel was very still. The man who took your family's land. His name was Hale? No, she said. Different man, different state. She looked at him. But the same kind of person, same methods, same certainty that he's owed things other people built. The quiet in the room went a different quality. I'm not going to lose this land, Nathaniel said. I know, she said. I'm going to help make sure of that. He looked at her for a long moment, and she thought he might say something about the word we again, the way he had the other night. But he didn't. He just nodded, and she went back out into the hall. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that was hard and uneven, and nothing like what Clara had imagined when she'd read the advertisement in the Cincinnati newspaper back in the last desperate days before she'd lost the rooming house room too. She woke before the house. She managed the kitchen and the household accounts, and the ongoing inventory that had revealed 3 significant supply problems she was now in the process of quietly correcting. She rode with Dawes twice a week to learn the property, and she was getting better on horseback, though better was a relative term and the horse still made decisions she hadn't authorized. She sat with Rose through 2 more storms and taught Eliza to mend her own clothes, which Eliza accepted with grudging efficiency. She ate dinners that started silent and ended marginally less silent. She learned that Nathaniel drank his coffee black and too hot, and read land surveys the way other men read newspapers. She learned that Eliza kept a journal she thought no one knew about, and Rose talked in her sleep. She also learned that someone was watching the ranch. Not dramatically, not in the way of stories where a figure stands on the ridge with a gun. It was subtler than that. A gate that had been latched was unlatched. A section of fence on the east boundary that Dawes had repaired was damaged again within a week, in exactly the same spot, in a way that looked like weather, but wasn't. Someone walked the property line on the western edge at night. She'd seen the track in the soft ground along the creek, 2 separate occasions, and the boots were different each time. She didn't tell Nathaniel all of it. She told him enough. She was building a picture. The evening things shifted between her and the girls happened over a thunderstorm that rolled in from the northwest with almost no warning, the way Colorado storms did in summer, fast and loud and taking up the whole sky at once. Clara was in the kitchen when the light outside turned the yellow-green color that meant nothing good. She heard Rose before she saw her, a high, cut-off sound from upstairs, the particular note of a child who has been trying not to be afraid and has just lost the battle. She went upstairs. Rose was in her room with her knees pulled up to her chest on the bed, both hands over her ears, her face pressed into the wall. She was not crying yet, but she was close. Clara sat on the edge of the bed. She didn't say it's okay because it wasn't going to be okay for a while yet. And Rose was old enough to know empty comfort when she heard it. "Tell me something," Clara said. "What's the worst storm you remember?" Rose didn't answer right away. The thunder hit. Close. The kind that vibrates in your teeth. And she flinched hard, but she didn't cover her ears again. "The one when Mama was sick," she said against the wall. "Tell me about it." "It went all night. I was scared and Eliza came and sat with me, but she was scared too. She just didn't say so." A pause, and then, smaller, "Mama couldn't come because she was too sick." "I'm here," Clara said. "I'm not going anywhere." She sat there while the storm moved over them, all its noise and violence, and the particular helplessness of being small inside something large. Rose didn't move closer to her, but after a while she turned her face away from the wall and watched the window instead, where the rain came down in sheets that blurred everything outside into gray. Neither of them heard Eliza come in. She stood in the doorway with her arms folded the way she always did, but there was nothing protective about it now. She was holding herself, not warding anyone off. She'd clearly been scared too and had come to her sister and found her sister not alone. She could have left. She didn't. Clara moved slightly on the bed. Not a spoken invitation, just a shift, creating space. Eliza came and sat on the other side of Rose. She unfolded her arms and let one of them rest around Rose's shoulders. They sat there through the worst of it, all 3 of them, while the storm did what storms do and eventually wore itself out and left the world soaked and quiet. Later, after Rose had fallen asleep between them, Eliza said in a low voice, "She always gets like this." "I know," Clara said. Dawes told me. Papa doesn't know what to do with it. He just keeps saying she'll grow out of it." "Maybe she will," Clara said. "Until then, she doesn't have to be alone for it." Eliza was quiet for a moment. "Why did you ask her about the worst storm?" "Because the thing you're afraid of gets smaller when you can talk about it," Clara said. "Sometimes." Eliza looked at her sleeping sister. "Does it work for everything?" "No," Clara said honestly. "Not everything." They sat there a while longer in the dark room with the rain tapping out its last quiet measures against the window. It was a week after the storm when Victor Hale came to Silverleaf. Clara was in the yard when his wagon pulled up. A fine wagon, the kind that announced money without trying too hard. He was a big man, heavier than Nathaniel, but not taller, with a face that had been handsome once and had settled into something that wanted to be distinguished. He wore his good clothes to a ranch call, which told her something about him. He was always performing. He saw her, and his face did the quick calculation men like him do when they encounter a woman they hadn't expected. "You must be the new wife," he said, with the particular inflection that made new wife into a category rather than a description. "I'm Clara," she said. She didn't fill in the rest. He stepped down from the wagon. "Victor Hale, I have business with Nathaniel." "He's in the north pasture," she said. "I can get word to him, or you can wait." I'll wait, he said. His eyes moved around the yard, noting things. She could see him noting them. The repaired fence section by the barn, the fresh order of supplies stacked near the outbuilding, the small changes she'd made in the 6 weeks since she'd arrived. Things look different, he said. They often do, she said, when someone's paying attention. He looked at her then, really looked, the way he hadn't done before because he'd assumed she didn't require it. She kept her expression pleasant and her eyes level, and she thought, I know exactly what you are. He smiled. It was a comfortable smile, practiced, designed to suggest that he was a reasonable man who simply wanted reasonable things. You're not what I expected, he said. People keep telling me that, she said. He laughed, a short, genuine sound that surprised her, though she didn't show it. I can see why he chose you, he said, like it was a compliment. I'll get word to Nathaniel, she said, and went inside. She told Dawes, not Hattie, which was deliberate. She also went to the kitchen window where she could see the yard and watch Hale waiting without him knowing she was watching. He walked the yard while he waited. He was good at making it look casual, but she could see it for what it was, an inspection. He looked at the outbuildings. He stopped at the edge of the kitchen garden where the salvias were coming back in, strong now, green and purposeful. He stood at the fence line and looked out toward the south, toward where the creek ran, toward the water. Nathaniel arrived 20 minutes later, still dusty from the pasture, and his face when he saw Hale's wagon had a particular closed quality that told her everything about how many times they'd had versions of this conversation. She watched them in the yard from the window. She couldn't hear what was said, but she could read it in the posture. Hale expansive, open, arms occasionally spreading in a gesture that said, "Be reasonable." Nathaniel very still in the way that meant he was holding something back. And then a moment, toward the end, where Hale said something and Nathaniel turned and looked toward the house, toward the kitchen window. At her. She didn't step back. Hale followed his gaze. He found her in the window and held eye contact for a beat too long, with that comfortable, practiced smile still in place. Then he got back in his wagon and left. Nathaniel came inside. He went straight to the kitchen and poured himself a cup of water and drank it standing up before he said anything. He told me you were a liability, Nathaniel said. She'd been expecting something like this, and she'd been expecting to feel something about it, and she did. A cold pull in the chest that she recognized as the familiar arrival of a fight she hadn't asked for. What else did he say, she asked. That a mail-order bride from nowhere was going to make the property harder to hold. That people in town already had questions about your character. He set the cup down. That it might be better for everyone, including me, if we came to some arrangement before things got complicated. He's very efficient, she said. He is? Does he know about my family, about what happened in Ohio? Nathaniel looked at her. I don't know. Why? Because if he's done research on you, and men like him always do, he may have found it, and if he found it, he'll use it. She leaned against the counter. He'll say I came here because I'm a woman with nothing, no family, no resources, no one to vouch for me. He'll say that makes me the kind of person who'd do anything to keep a roof over her head, including deceiving you. Will people believe that? Nathaniel asked. Some of them already do, she said. You know that. He did. She could see it in his face. What do you want me to do? He asked, and it was the first time he'd asked her that. Not what should I do, or here's what I'm going to do, but what do you want? She thought about her father, the map spread across the kitchen table, the lawyers, the long losing battle against someone who had decided he was entitled to what her family had built. Don't sell, she said, and don't react to him faster than you have to. Every time you react, he learns something. Make him show you his next move before you show him yours. And in the meantime, she said, we keep running this ranch. We keep doing the work, and we don't let him make us smaller than we are. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. You fought someone like him before, he said. It wasn't a question. I lost, she said. I learned from it. He nodded slowly. He picked up his hat from the table and turned it in his hands the way he did when he was thinking something through. There's a town meeting next month, he said. Hale's been using them, talking about development, improvements to the water infrastructure. making it sound like he's doing the county a favor. Will people listen? He's buying goodwill as fast as he can. Nathaniel set the hat back down. The Mercer family sold to him last spring. The Abbotts in the fall. He's moving fast now. Then we have to be visible, she said. At the meeting, together. He looked at her. The word together sat in the air between them the way we had sat before. You'd come to a town meeting, he said. I'd come to a town meeting, she said. And I'd stand next to you, and people would have to decide what to think about that. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he was going to say no, or something that amounted to no. All right, he said. He picked up his hat and went back out to the ranch that was still his, and intended to stay that way. Clara stood in the kitchen for a moment, listening to the sound of his boots crossing the yard, thinking about how quickly a place could start to feel worth fighting for, and how that was either very good news or the beginning of a new kind of loss. She went back to work. The town meeting was held on a Thursday evening in the Harding Creek Assembly Hall, which was a generous name for a building that was really just the largest room anyone in the county had agreed to share. It smelled like sawdust and lamp oil and the particular staleness of a space that got used once a month and aired out rarely. By the time Clara and Nathaniel arrived, most of the chairs were already taken. She felt the room shift when they walked in. Not dramatically. It wasn't a gasp or a hush. It was subtler than that. A few heads turning. A whispered exchange near the back. Mabel Greer, who Clara had learned was the town's primary distributor of opinion, looked up from her seat in the third row and took in Clara's presence with the careful attention of someone filing information away. Clara had worn her better dress. Not her best. She only had two, and Bess felt like trying too hard, but the one without the worn elbows. The one that was still a deep green rather than a faded approximation of it. She'd pinned her hair properly. She looked like a woman who belonged somewhere, which was the entire point. Nathaniel put his hand briefly at the small of her back as they found seats near the aisle, and she wasn't sure he knew he'd done it. Victor Hale was already there, near the front, talking to two men Clara didn't recognize. He saw them come in. His expression didn't change, which told her that he'd expected them and had prepared for it. The meeting opened with county business. A road repair dispute. A boundary question between two families who'd been arguing about it since before Clara arrived and would likely be arguing about it after she was gone. Clara listened without comment and watched the room. Hale waited. That was part of his method. He'd learned to let impatience work for him, to let people wonder when he was going to speak, so that when he finally did, the room was already leaning toward him. He spoke for 12 minutes about water infrastructure. He used the words community and future and responsible development in a way that made them sound like they meant something specific when they didn't. He talked about the drought risks the county faced, the need for centralized water management, the fact that several properties were sitting on resources that could benefit everyone if managed correctly. He never said Silverleaf by name. He didn't have to. When he finished, a man named Garrett, who ran a small operation south of the Cross property, asked what centralized management would actually mean for current water rights holders. Hale smiled the comfortable smile. Existing rights would be honored, he said. We're talking about improvement, not replacement. Honored how? Garrett pressed. On paper or in practice? Both, Hale said easily. I wouldn't have it any other way. This was a lie. Clara was certain of it, and she was equally certain that most of the people in the room didn't have enough information to know it was a lie. They wanted to believe it because the alternative was a fight, and fighting was expensive. She leaned slightly toward Nathaniel. Does Garrett know about the Abbott situation? She murmured. Some of it, Nathaniel said quietly. Can he get the rest? I can talk to him after. She sat back. Hale was taking questions now from the easier part of the room, the people who nodded along and asked about timelines and process rather than anything with teeth. Clara watched him work and thought about the man who had taken her family's land, and how he'd used the same technique, make the complicated things sound simple, make resistance sound selfish, give people a story they could tell themselves about why going along was the reasonable choice. When the formal questions wound down and the meeting moved toward its closing business, Nathaniel stood up. The room went quiet faster than it had for anything else. I want to put something on the record, Nathaniel said. He wasn't loud about it. He didn't need to be. He had the kind of voice that a room quieted for naturally. Silverleaf's water rights have been in place for 20 years. They're documented, they're clean, and they're not for sale. Not to the county, not to any private interest, not to any arrangement that sounds like community benefit but works out to something else. Hale's expression stayed pleasant. Nobody's asking you to. I know what's being asked, Nathaniel said, and I know how these conversations go. I want the people in this room to know where I stand before the asking gets more direct. A few people shifted in their seats. Mabel Greer had stopped pretending to look at her lap. Hale spread his hands in the gesture Clara had seen before. The be reasonable gesture. Nathaniel, I think you're reading something into a planning conversation that isn't there. Maybe, Nathaniel said. I'd rather say this clearly now and be wrong than stay quiet and find out I was right. He sat back down. Clara didn't look at Hale. She looked at the room, at the faces of people deciding what to think, calculating where interest lay, figuring out which side of this was safer. She recognized the calculation. She'd watched her father face it and lose it, because the side that was safer had not been the side that was right. On the way out, Garrett caught Nathaniel's arm and pulled him aside. Clara stood near the door and waited, and while she waited, Mabel Greer appeared at her elbow. You're settling in, Mabel said. It wasn't a question, and it wasn't a compliment exactly. Trying to, Clara said. People wondered if you would. Mabel had the directness of a woman who'd gotten old enough to stop softening things. The others didn't. I know. You're different from what people expected. She paused. I'm not sure yet if that's good or bad. Neither am I, Clara said, but I'm here either way. Mabel looked at her for a moment with sharp, assessing eyes. Hale's going to come at you, she said, low enough that it didn't carry. That's how he works when someone gets in his way. He finds a soft place and he pushes. I know that too, Clara said. Just so you're not surprised, Mabel said, and moved away. 2 weeks after the town meeting, Hattie quit. She gave no reason, which was itself a reason. She'd been with the ranch for 3 years, and she left on a Tuesday with her things packed in a flour sack and a face that showed nothing except the careful blankness of someone who has been told what to do and is doing it. Mrs. Higgins told Clara. Clara told Nathaniel. Nathaniel asked Dawes to find out what he could. What Dawes found out 3 days later was that Hattie's brother worked for one of Hale's operations to the east, and that Hattie had, over the past several weeks, been telling someone, she wouldn't say who, about the household routines. When Dawes pressed her on it, she cried and said she hadn't known it would be used for anything, and that she was sorry, and that was all he got. Clara sat with this information for a full evening before she said anything to Nathaniel. How long do you think she was talking to them? She asked. Dawes thinks since before you arrived, Nathaniel said. Maybe longer. So, Hale knew about me before I got here. He knew someone was coming. He probably knew more than that. Nathaniel's voice was even, but his jaw was tight. I should have looked harder at who was talking to who on this property. You run a ranch, Clara said. You can't watch everything. I should have watched this. She didn't argue with him because he wasn't wrong exactly, but she also knew that self-blame at this point was a luxury. What matters now is figuring out what he knows and what he's planning to do with it, she said. He knows the household routines. He knows the supply schedules. He knows... Nathaniel stopped. What? He may know about the water survey, Nathaniel said. I had a man out here 6 weeks ago before you arrived. A hydrologist. Private, not county. I wanted an independent assessment of what the aquifer actually looks like. He paused. If Hale knows that report exists, he'll want it, because it's thorough and it's good, and it proves that the water on this property is worth considerably more than even I'd thought. Clara understood what he was saying. Where is the report? In my office, in the locked drawer. Has anyone been in your office? Nathaniel looked at her. Then he stood up and went to his office and came back 2 minutes later with the expression of a man who has found something in the wrong place. It's been moved, he said. Not taken, but moved. Someone read it, Clara said, or tried to copy it. He sat back down heavily. The drawer was locked. The lock hasn't been forced. Does Mrs. Higgins have a key? She has a key to the house. Not to that drawer. Clem? No. They sat with that for a moment. You carry the key? Clara asked. On my ring. He looked at his hands. Dawes has a copy, for emergencies. Has Dawes been near Hale's people? Nathaniel looked up fast, and the look was sharp enough that Clara held up a hand. I'm not accusing him, she said. I'm asking. There's a difference. Dawes has been with me 11 years, Nathaniel said. I know, but someone with a key was in that drawer. The silence was uncomfortable in a way their silences hadn't been before. Not because they were angry at each other, but because they were both looking at a problem that had gotten closer to home than either of them had wanted. I'll talk to Dawes, Nathaniel said finally. Directly. Don't tell him about the survey first, she said. Ask him about the key. See what he says before you tell him what you know. He nodded. She went to bed that night with the uneasy feeling of a situation that was moving faster than she could track, and she lay awake listening to the cottonwoods until well past midnight. Dawes, when Nathaniel talked to him the next morning, was the one who solved it. He hadn't lent the key and hadn't been near Hale's people, but when Nathaniel described the situation, he was quiet for a moment and then said, Clem had my coat last month. When his got soaked through, wore it for a day. The key ring had been in the coat pocket. Clem, when confronted, didn't deny it. He was 23 years old and had a younger sister whose medical bills had been paid by someone he wouldn't name, and he'd been making what he thought were small trades ever since. Information for money, nothing that seemed like it would matter. He wept, which Clara thought was genuine, and said he hadn't known about the hydrologist's report specifically. He'd just left the key on Hale's man's table for 20 minutes while they ate together, and he supposed a copy could have been made. Nathaniel let him go. Not because he wasn't angry, but because Clem was young and scared and had been used in the way that people like Hale used people, finding the pressure point and pressing it. He gave him 2 weeks' wages and told him to go, and Clem went. Clara watched him ride out from the kitchen window. He wasn't evil, she said, when Nathaniel came inside. No, Nathaniel said. He was just broke and somebody noticed. She turned from the window. That's how Hale works. He finds the broke ones, the scared ones, the ones who have something they're protecting and not enough resources to protect it on their own. She paused. He did the same thing to a man who worked for my father. Found out the man owed money on a debt he was ashamed of, paid the debt, and owned the man after that. Nathaniel looked at her. You've been living with this longer than I have. I've been living with what comes after, she said. That's different. He came and stood near the window beside her, looking out at the yard where Clem's horse was now just a shape on the far end of the road. I'm going to go to the county land office, he said. I want certified copies of every document related to this property, water rights, land title, everything. If that report exists and Hale has a copy, I want to make sure there's a clear legal record of what this land is worth and who it belongs to. Good, she said. I want to come with you. He looked at her. 2 witnesses are harder to dismiss than 1, she said. And I can read a legal document. My father taught me. It was the most useful thing he ever did for me, as it turned out. All right, he said. She went to get her coat. The land office in Harding Creek was run by a thin man named Pruitt, who wore his hair parted with the precision of someone who had very little else he could control. He was polite to Nathaniel and invisible in his acknowledgement of Clara, which she was used to and which told her he was the kind of man who registered women as background detail rather than participants. She let Nathaniel lead the conversation, and she read the documents. The water rights were clean, as Nathaniel had said. The land title was clean. But there was something in the transfer records from 15 years ago, a notation in the margin of 1 page, a surveyor's addendum that had been filed separately from the main record, and when Clara found it, she read it 3 times before she said anything. Nathaniel, she said quietly. He came and looked over her shoulder at the page. What is that? He asked. It's a secondary survey from the original land grant, she said. It was filed as an addendum, and it's in a different hand from the rest of the record. She pointed to a notation near the bottom. This references a mineral rights clause. It's written as a standard exclusion, but the language is unusual. I've seen language like this before. What does it mean? It might mean nothing. It might mean someone, a long time ago, tried to create a loophole in the title that could be used later to challenge the property's boundaries. She looked at Pruitt, who was pretending to organize papers on his desk with great concentration. Mr. Pruitt, who filed this addendum? Pruitt looked up with the expression of a man who has been hoping not to be asked. I'd have to check the original filing record. Please do, Clara said. He checked. It took longer than it should have. When he came back with the filing log, his face was carefully neutral. Filed by a surveying firm out of Denver, he said, 12 years ago. On whose instruction? The filing doesn't specify a client, he said. Can a filing not specify a client? She asked. Pruitt looked uncomfortable. It's irregular, he admitted. Irregular, she repeated. Is there a way to find out who commissioned the survey? You'd need to contact the firm directly, if they still exist. He paused. Some of those firms were consolidated. Consolidated by whom? Nathaniel asked, and his voice had gone to the very quiet end of his register, which Clara had learned was where it went when he was most alert. Pruitt said nothing. Clara looked at Nathaniel. He looked at her. I'd like certified copies of everything in this file, Clara said to Pruitt, the main record and the addendum both. Notarized. That's your right, Pruitt said. It'll take a few days. We'll wait, Clara said pleasantly, but we'd like them before the end of the week. On the ride home, she told Nathaniel what she suspected, that the addendum had been placed in the record specifically to create an ambiguity that could be exploited later, that it was the kind of legal trap that required patience to set and patience to spring, and that it would only be useful to someone who had the resources to litigate and the time to wait. You think Hale put it there, Nathaniel said, or someone working for him did 12 years ago, before he'd even approached you about selling, she said. He's been planning this longer than you know. Nathaniel drove for a while without speaking. My wife would have missed that entirely, he said. Not because she wasn't smart, because she didn't read documents the way you do. It was an odd thing to say, and they both knew it. Clara didn't respond to it directly. My father made me sit with every paper that crossed our kitchen table, she said. Deeds, contracts, bills of sale. He said a woman who can't read a contract is a woman who can be cheated by one. Smart man, Nathaniel said. He was, she said, just not smart enough in other ways. She looked at the road ahead. He trusted people more than the situation warranted. And you don't? I trust specific people for specific reasons, she said. That's different from trusting generally. He glanced at her. Where do I fall? She looked at him. You're honest, she said, and you're stubborn about the right things. That's enough for now. He seemed to find this satisfactory, or at least he didn't push it further. They drove the rest of the way home in the kind of quiet that had been growing between them. Not empty, not comfortable exactly, but the kind of quiet that means two people are thinking about the same things in different ways. What happened 10 days later was not something Clara had seen coming, and that bothered her afterward more than the thing itself. She'd been careful, she'd been watching, she'd been building the picture piece by piece. The key, the survey, the addendum, Hale's movements, the pattern of small intrusions on the property. She thought she understood the shape of the danger. What she hadn't accounted for was how fast Hale could move when he decided to stop being patient. It started with the dinner. Mrs. Higgins had gone to her sister's for 2 days. Her sister was sick, a genuine illness, Clara had checked, and so Clara had taken over the kitchen entirely. She'd made a stew from the morning's slaughter, bread that had come out better than her first attempts, and a dried apple dish that Rose had requested with the particular specificity of a child who had decided to trust someone's cooking. Clara noticed the smile and looked away from it quickly. 2 hours later, Nathaniel was sick. He came out of his office white-faced and went to his room and didn't come back down. Clara found him an hour after that, badly sick, worse than she'd seen a person from a stomach illness. Fast and severe in a way that scared her in the specific cold way that useful fear works rather than panic. She went to check the girls. Rose was fine. Eliza had a headache she hadn't mentioned at dinner. That was all. Only Nathaniel was sick, and Nathaniel had eaten from a serving bowl that Clara hadn't touched. She'd been back and forth from the kitchen between servings, managing the bread, and she'd taken from the pot rather than the bowl on the table. She went to the kitchen, and she stood in front of that serving bowl for a long moment. Then she found Dawes. He came immediately. He looked at Nathaniel, looked at the bowl, and his face did something that Clara recognized as the same calculation she was making. "I'll ride for Doc Emery," he said. "Go now," she said. "Don't stop for anything." After he left, she was alone in the house with 2 girls and a man who was getting worse, and the knowledge sitting in her chest like a stone that someone had done this deliberately. She went over everything in her mind: the food preparation, who had been in the kitchen, the hour and a half between when she'd finished cooking and when dinner was served. She'd left the kitchen twice, once to get Rose's cardigan from upstairs, once to speak with Dawes about the fence line on the west boundary. Both times the stew had been on the stove and the serving bowl had been on the table, prepared. She hadn't locked the back door. She went to the back door and opened it and looked at the frame. There was no damage. The latch worked as it should, but when she crouched down and looked at the ground outside, the soft earth showed boot prints coming in from the east, from the direction of the kitchen garden, stopping at the door and then turning back. Someone had come in the back door while she was elsewhere in the house. Someone who knew the routine well enough to know she'd step away and for how long. Someone who had been inside before. She stood up. Her hands were steady, which surprised her. She'd expected to be shaking. She went back inside and sat with Nathaniel and kept a cool cloth on his forehead and spoke quietly to him when he was awake, which wasn't often, and she thought about what Mabel Greer had said at the town meeting. He finds the soft place and pushes. And she thought about her father, who had found the soft place too late. And she thought, not this time. When Doc Emery arrived, he was a compact, efficient man in his 60s who didn't waste words on reassurance. He examined Nathaniel, asked Clara what he'd eaten and when, asked how quickly the illness had progressed, and then looked at her with eyes that had been doing this for a long time. "This isn't fever," he said. "This is something he ingested." "I know," she said. He looked at her steadily. "You knew before I said so." "Yes." "You ate from the same pot?" "Not the serving bowl. I took from the pot in the kitchen." He thought about that. "Someone added something after you'd finished cooking." "That's what I think," she said. "You need to keep the bowl and don't clean it," he said. "And you need to tell me if anyone else had access to your kitchen tonight." She told him everything. He listened without interrupting. After, he stayed with Nathaniel and told Clara he wasn't in danger of dying, but it would be a bad 3 days and he needed fluids and rest, and no more meals from this kitchen until she'd gone over everything in it. She went over everything in it. She was methodical about it. She found nothing obvious. Whatever had been used, it had been added directly to the serving bowl and not left behind. But she found something else. On the floor near the back door, half under the edge of the cabinet, a small button. Dark brown. Nothing distinctive about it except that she'd never seen it before, and she knew this kitchen well enough now to know what belonged in it. She picked it up and held it in her palm. A button. Maybe nothing. Maybe the most important thing she'd found so far. She put it in her pocket. Nathaniel was on his feet by the second day, pale and unsteady, but functional enough to sit in his office for an hour in the morning before Clara made him go back to bed. On the third day, he was better. On the fourth, he was himself, or close to it, and that was the morning he found Clara at the kitchen table with a sheet of paper and a very organized list. "What is that?" he asked. "Everything I know," she said, "in order." He sat down and looked at the list. She'd written out the timeline: the crow, the pantry theft, the latch left open, Clem and the key, Hattie's departure, the addendum in the land records, the dinner, the boot prints, the button. Each item with a date and a connection drawn to the next. He read it twice. "You've been tracking this the whole time," he said. "Yes." "And you didn't tell me all of it." "I told you what you needed to know when you needed to know it," she said. "I didn't want to alarm you over things I wasn't sure about yet." He looked up from the list. "Clara, I need you to tell me things." "I know," she said. "I'm telling you now." He looked at the list again, at the neat progression of it, at the thing it added up to. "He's been building this since before you arrived," he said. This isn't reactive. He planned this before he even knew who was coming. He planned to make this house vulnerable, she said. The specific method, using the poisoning, then blaming the new wife, the outsider nobody trusted. I think that was adapted once I arrived, once he saw what he had to work with. The implication settled between them. He's going to blame you, Nathaniel said. He already is, she said. Dawes told me this morning that there's a story moving through town, that the new bride brought something into the household, that the rancher who was foolish enough to marry a stranger is paying for it. Nathaniel's face went through several things in quick succession. Nobody in this town knows you, Clara said, keeping her voice level because his anger wasn't useful right now and she needed him thinking. They don't know what I came from or what I'm capable of. All they know is what Hale tells them, and Hale is very good at telling stories. So what do we do? She looked at the list. She thought about her father standing in front of the county officer with his hands full of documents that should have been enough and weren't, because documents aren't enough when the story has already been told. We don't defend, she said. Defense lets him set the terms. We take it to them directly, all of it. The addendum, the timeline, the boot prints, the button, the pattern of what's been happening here. We make the story too big and too detailed to dismiss. Who do we take it to? The town, she said. The people who are going to decide what to believe, before he gets to frame it himself. Nathaniel was quiet. There's a risk, she said. If we go public with it, and we can't prove enough of it, it looks like we're desperate and making accusations. That could hurt us as much as saying nothing. But if we don't go public, he controls the narrative, she said. And once he controls it, he won't let go. Nathaniel looked at her. He looked at the list. He looked at his hands on the table, still slightly thinner than they'd been before the illness, and she watched him do the internal reckoning that she'd done 100 times herself. The calculation of risk against risk, the question of which danger was the one you could survive. When? He said. Soon, she said, before he moves again. She folded the list and put it in her pocket alongside the button, and outside the cottonwoods moved in the morning wind, and inside the house the girls were waking up and the ranch was beginning another day of being worth fighting for. They had 4 days before Hale moved first. Claire had thought they'd have more time. She'd miscalculated, not the direction of his next move, but the speed of it. She'd assumed he would wait, let the story about the poisoning spread through town at its natural pace, give the suspicion time to harden before he applied pressure. That was how patient men operated. That was how the man who'd taken her family's land had operated. But Hale wasn't patient anymore. Something had shifted in him after the town meeting, after Nathaniel stood up and put his position on public record. She understood it later, after everything, that Nathaniel's speech had accelerated Hale's timeline because it closed off the quiet options, the behind-the-scenes arrangements that Hale preferred. He'd been forced into the open, and he didn't like it, and men who don't like being forced into the open tend to move fast and hard when they finally decide to. On a Monday morning, 4 days after Clara had laid out her list on the kitchen table, a man arrived at Silverleaf with a letter from the county sheriff's office. It was not an arrest warrant, it was an official notice of inquiry, which was different, technically, but not in ways that mattered to a town that would hear sheriff's office and draw its own conclusions. The inquiry concerned the illness at the Cross household and requested that all members of the household make themselves available for questioning regarding food preparation and access to the kitchen on the relevant evening. Clara read it twice, standing in the front doorway with the messenger watching her face. "Who filed this?" she asked. "I just deliver the notices, ma'am," the man said. He was young and genuinely apologetic about it, which meant he was a messenger and nothing more. She thanked him and closed the door. She stood in the hallway for a moment with the letter in her hand. Then she went to find Nathaniel. He was in the barn with Dawes going over the fall grazing plan, and he read the letter with the particular stillness she'd come to recognize as his anger. Not the explosive kind, but the deep-seated, load-bearing kind that didn't make noise because it was holding too much weight. "He filed a complaint," Nathaniel said. "Or had someone file it on his behalf?" Clara said. "He won't have put his name on it directly. That's not how he does things." Dawes, who had read the letter over Nathaniel's shoulder, said, "This is going to be all over town by noon." It already is, Clara said. That's the point. The inquiry itself is secondary. The story it generates is the weapon. Nathaniel handed the letter back to her. We go to the sheriff's office today. We don't wait for them to summon us formally. Yes, she said, and we bring the list. The list isn't legal proof of anything, he said. No, but it's a record. A detailed, dated, documented record of a pattern of harassment and interference. That changes the shape of the conversation. She folded the letter carefully. If we walk in there looking like we have something to answer for, we're already losing. We walk in like we've been waiting for the chance to lay this out, and it's different. Dawes looked at her. You've done this before, he said. Not a question. I've watched someone do it wrong, she said. Close enough. The sheriff of Harding Creek was a man named Aldous Bray, who was 61 years old, had been doing this job for 19 years, and had the expression of a man who had heard every possible version of every possible story and had stopped being surprised by any of them. He was not in Hale's pocket. Clara had determined this through 3 separate pieces of information gathered over the past weeks, including a conversation Dawes had reported in which Bray had declined a very generous dinner invitation from Hale with language that suggested it wasn't the first invitation he'd declined. He was, however, cautious. He was the kind of careful man who waited to see which way a thing was going to fall before he put his weight on it, which made him honest but not necessarily useful in a crisis. He looked up from his desk when Nathaniel and Clara walked in without an appointment, and he looked at the letter Clara placed in front of him, and he said, I was going to send for you this week. We saved you the trouble, Nathaniel said, and we brought something. Clara laid out the list. Not the original. She'd made a clean copy the night before, written in her clearest hand with every date precise and every connection explained in plain language rather than implication. Bray read it. He was a slow reader, the kind who actually reads rather than skimming for the parts he expected, and Clara was glad of it. She sat across from his desk with her hands in her lap and let the document do the work it was built to do. When he finished, he looked up at her. You've been keeping this record the whole time. Since the first week, she said. The button, he said. She took it from her pocket and placed it on his desk. I haven't found whose it is, but I know it doesn't belong in that kitchen. He picked it up and turned it over. This isn't evidence of anything by itself. No, she said. But it's part of a pattern, and the pattern is evidence. He looked at Nathaniel. The addendum in the land records. You've got certified copies? We're picking them up Friday, Nathaniel said. Pruitt said he needed the week. I know Pruitt, Bray said, with a tone that suggested knowing Pruitt was not an uncomplicated experience. He looked at the list again. The Denver surveying firm. I can look into that. We'd appreciate it, Clara said. Bray set the list down and folded his hands on his desk and looked at both of them. The inquiry was filed anonymously, he said. I want you to know that. I received a written account of the illness and a suggestion that it warranted investigation. I followed procedure because I'm required to. He paused. I'm also required to investigate the source of anonymous complaints when there's reason to question the motive. Is there reason? Clara asked. There's a pattern, he said, and tapped her list once with one finger. Now there is. He stood up and shook Nathaniel's hand and then, after a brief pause, Clara's. Don't leave town, he said, which was a formality he delivered with enough dryness that it was almost an apology for needing to say it. We weren't planning to, Nathaniel said. They were outside and halfway to the wagon when Clara heard her name. Not Mrs. Cross, which some people had started using and others pointedly hadn't, but Clara, which meant someone who knew her. She turned and found Mabel Greer on the boardwalk outside the dry goods store with a basket over her arm and the expression of a woman who has made a decision. I heard about the sheriff's notice, Mabel said. An hour ago. I want you to know that's not how all of us see this. Thank you, Clara said. I also want you to know that Hale's been talking. Mabel's voice was low and direct. At the feed store, at the bank, at the Hendersons' dinner last Saturday. He's been very careful about it. He doesn't say anything specific, he just asks questions. How well does anyone really know her? Whether Nathaniel might have moved too fast. Whether it's possible someone in that position might have reasons the rest of us don't understand. She paused. He's good at it. He asks the question and lets people do the rest themselves. I know, Clara said. Some people are listening, Mabel said. I want you to understand the size of what you're dealing with, not to discourage you, because you need to know the actual thing, not a smaller version of it. Clara looked at her. What would you do? She asked. In my position. Mabel was quiet for a moment. She was the kind of woman who didn't answer quickly because she actually thought about the question before she did. I'd make sure people saw you, she said finally. Not talking about yourself, not defending yourself, just being here, being real. Hale's picture of you is an idea. The more people see the actual person, the harder it is to hold on to the idea. The town social, Clara said. 2 weeks. Mabel nodded once. Be there. Both of you. Bring the girls. She moved on down the boardwalk. Clara watched her go. Nathaniel had been close enough to hear. She's right, he said. I know she is, Clara said, but 2 weeks is a long time for Hale to keep working. Then we work too, he said. The next 10 days were the longest of Clara's time at Silverleaf, not because of any single event, but because of the quality of the waiting, the sense of a situation drawing tight that she couldn't fully control and could only try to manage. She kept the household running, she kept the records. She finished the certified copies from Pruitt's office with Nathaniel and went through them line by line at the kitchen table over 2 evenings, and found 3 more irregularities in the addendum that she hadn't caught on first reading, small ones, the kind that required knowing what normal language looked like before you could recognize what wasn't. She wrote them down. She added them to the file. She also did the thing Mabel had suggested, which was to be visible. She went with Mrs. Higgins to the supply run on Tuesday. She brought Rose to the dry goods store on Thursday and let the child's presence do the quiet work that children's presence does, making a person real, making them part of the ordinary texture of a community rather than an abstract subject of gossip. Rose, for her part, was completely unaware of being deployed as a social asset and spent the entire trip trying to decide between a red hair ribbon and a blue one. Which one? She asked Clara, holding both up. Red, Clara said. The blue washes you out. How do you know? Your coloring is like your father's. Warm tones suit you better. Rose looked at her with the expression children get when an adult has said something unexpectedly specific and useful. Is that true for me too? Eliza asked from beside the ribbon display. She had come on the supply trip with the studied casualness of someone who definitely had not been hoping to be included. Eliza, you can wear almost anything, Clara said honestly. You have the kind of face that does the work. Eliza tried and failed not to look pleased. Mrs. Higgins, who was examining bolts of fabric at the end of the counter, made a sound that might have been almost a laugh. 6 days before the town social, Garrett came to Silverleaf. He was the rancher who'd asked the pointed question at the town meeting, the one Nathaniel had talked to in the doorway afterward. He arrived on horseback in the mid-afternoon and tied up at the post, and came to the front door with his hat in his hands, and the look of a man who has been thinking about something for a while and has finally decided to say it. Clara brought him to the kitchen. The kitchen, not the parlor, because the kitchen was honest and the parlor was formal, and she wanted this conversation honest. She made coffee. He sat at the table. The Abbott land, he said when Nathaniel joined them. I've been looking into it, how Hale acquired it. And, Nathaniel said, there was a water dispute. Minor one, the kind that happens between neighbors. But Hale got involved. He offered to mediate, said he had contacts in the county office who could sort it out quickly. The Abbotts were grateful. They let him look at their paperwork. Garrett turned his hat around in his hands. 3 months later, there was a question raised about their title. Small thing, an old survey discrepancy. Hale offered to help resolve it. Then he offered to buy them out, said it would be cleaner than fighting the title issue. They took the offer. He paused. Sound familiar? The room was quiet. The survey discrepancy, Clara said. Where was it filed? County Land Office, Garrett said, by a Denver firm. Clara and Nathaniel looked at each other. Same firm? Nathaniel asked her. I'd need to see the filing, she said, but I'd bet money on it. Garrett looked between them. You found something. We found the same pattern in our records, Clara said. He's been doing this more than once, on more than one property, which means there's a paper trail and it leads somewhere. Can you prove it? Garrett asked. Not entirely, not yet. She looked at him. But you're not the only neighbor who's going to recognize this pattern when you see it laid out. Are you? He thought about it. Mercer sold last year. He wasn't happy about it. He might talk. Who else? Henderson's been approached but hasn't sold. He's nervous about it. A pause. There's a widow woman north of here, Darcy Fenn. Hale's been circling her property for 8 months. Her husband left the paperwork in a state and she doesn't have anyone helping her read it. Clara filed this away. I'd like to speak with her, she said. Garrett looked at Nathaniel, then back at Clara, with the expression of a man recalibrating who he was actually dealing with. I can introduce you, he said. Good, she said, before the social. After he left, Nathaniel sat at the table with his coffee gone cold and said, How many properties do you think he's done this to? I don't know, Claire said, but more than one means more than one set of records. And more than one set of records means he's left evidence somewhere that can't be explained away as an isolated incident. The sheriff can't ignore a pattern that covers 6 properties. No, she said, he can't. She refilled her own coffee and stood at the counter and looked out the window at the garden where the salvias were now fully in bloom, small and purple and surprisingly sturdy. What is it? Nathaniel asked, watching her. I keep thinking about the people who already sold, she said. The Abbotts, the Mercers. Even if we stop him, even if we expose the whole thing, they've already lost what they lost. That's not your fault. I know. She turned from the window. It's just what's true. She set down her cup. We need to be at that social, and we need to have something concrete to show people. Not accusations, evidence, documents they can look at themselves. We'll have the certified copies by Friday, he said, and Garrett's account. And I want to talk to Darcy Fenn. She was already thinking through the order of it, the way the pieces needed to be arranged so they told the story clearly enough that a room full of people who didn't want to believe it would have no reasonable alternative. I'll need 2 days to put it together properly. You'll have them, he said. Darcy Fenn was a small woman in her late 50s who had the look of someone who had been weathered by work rather than difficulty, which was a distinction Clara had learned to make. She met them at her kitchen door on a Wednesday afternoon with flour on her hands and eyes that assessed them both in a single efficient look. She knew Garrett, so she let them in. Clara explained what she knew about the survey addendum. Darcy listened without interrupting, which was the sign of someone who was following every word rather than waiting for a gap. When Clara finished, Darcy went to a box on the kitchen shelf and took out a folded document and put it on the table. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about? She said. Clara unfolded it. She read it carefully. Her chest went cold and steady. Where did you get this? She asked. A man came by 4 months ago, Darcy said. Said he was from the county, doing a routine check on land records in this district. Left me a copy of what he said was a survey addendum to my original title. She paused. He was very polite about it. Said it was probably nothing, but I should be aware. This is the same language, Clara said to Nathaniel. Near identical, same firm. She's been set up the same way, Nathaniel said. I know, Darcy said flatly. I knew it then. I just didn't have anyone who could tell me what I was looking at. She looked at Clara. Can I keep a copy of whatever you put together for the sheriff? I'll make you one myself, Clara said. Darcy nodded once. Then I'll be at the social, she said, and I'll bring the Mercer boy. His parents might not come, but he will. The night before the town social, Clara sat at the kitchen table with the full file in front of her. It was substantial now. The certified land records, the annotated addendum with her 3 additional findings marked and explained, Garrett's written account of the Abbott acquisition which he'd agreed to sign, the timeline she'd constructed from her own notes, and a clean summary document she'd written that laid out the pattern across the known properties in plain, precise language without legal jargon. Nathaniel came in late and looked at the table. Is it enough? He asked. It's what we have, she said. Whether it's enough depends on the room. He sat down across from her. The lamp between them made the kitchen feel smaller than it was. which was not unpleasant. "I want to say something," he said. She looked up. "When you arrived," he said, "I told the girls you'd come to stay. I said it like a fact when it wasn't one. I said it because it's what you say." He looked at his hands. I didn't expect what actually happened. I didn't expect you." She waited, because there was clearly more, and she didn't want to fill the space before he found it. "The way you came into this house in this situation and just started working," he said. "Not performing, not managing me, just doing the actual thing." He shook his head slightly. "I've been watching you for 3 months, and I still don't entirely know what to do with it." "You don't have to do anything with it," she said. "That's the thing," he said. "I think I might want to." He looked at her directly. "I think I might want to do quite a lot with it. And I'm not sure I know how to say that clearly without it sounding like something it isn't." She looked at him across the table, this stubborn, honest, quietly complicated man who made carved horses for his daughter, and read land surveys like other people read novels, and had trusted her with something real before he'd had any reason to. "Say it the way you mean it," she said. "You're plain spoken, I've noticed." Something shifted in his face, the closest she'd seen him come to unguarded. "I don't want you to be here because the arrangement required it," he said. "I want you to be here because you want to be. And I'd like at some point to be the kind of man worth wanting to be here for." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the cottonwoods moved. "You're not starting from zero on that," she said. He let out a breath. "Tomorrow first," she said. "Tomorrow first," he agreed. She went to bed and slept better than she had in 3 months, and that itself meant something. The town social was held in the same assembly hall as the planning meeting, but dressed up for it. Oil lamps turned higher, tables along one wall with food brought by half the families in the county, children running between adult legs in the particular chaos of a community that doesn't have many occasions to be all in one room at the same time. The noise was immediate and warm, and Clara felt the specific strangeness of walking into it as someone who had never been to one of these before but was apparently expected to behave as if she belonged. Nathaniel walked in beside her. The girls were just ahead. Rose had chosen the red ribbon, which looked exactly as good as Clara had said it would, and Eliza had worn her best dress and was pretending she hadn't made a special effort. The room noticed them. That was unavoidable. But the noticing was different from what it had been at the planning meeting. Less pointed, more uncertain. The story about the sheriff's inquiry had circulated, and so had the counter-story. The one Mabel and Garrett, and apparently Darcy Fenn, had been quietly advancing in the days leading up to tonight. People didn't know what to believe yet, and not knowing what to believe made them watch rather than decide. Clara let them watch. She talked to people. Not about the land situation, not first, not leading with it. She talked about the fall weather and the quality of the corn harvest someone's wife mentioned and Rose's developing obsession with the salvias in the garden. She was present and specific and not performing anything except attention, which was the one thing she'd learned could not be faked convincingly for long. It was 40 minutes in, when the room had settled into its rhythms, that Victor Hale arrived. He came with 2 men she didn't recognize. Not ranch hands, dressed too well for that. Legal men, she thought, or men who wanted to look like legal men. He saw her immediately. He did the quick calculation again, the same one he'd done in the yard at Silverleaf, and this time his face showed more of it. The fact that she was here, composed and present, and surrounded by people who were talking to her like she was one of them, was not part of his plan. He moved to the center of the room with the comfort of a man who'd decided that momentum was his best option now. "I want to say something to this community," he said. The room quieted. He had a voice for rooms, loud without being harsh, the kind that made people feel like they were being addressed personally. "I've been made aware that there are questions circulating about certain accusations against my business interests," he said. "I want to be clear that those accusations are the product of a desperate situation." He paused. A man with a struggling property and a wife he barely knows, facing serious questions about what happened in his own household. "The property isn't struggling," Garrett said from the left side of the room. Hale looked at him. "I'm speaking generally. You're speaking specifically," Garrett said, "about a specific man and a specific woman and a specific set of accusations that you filed anonymously with the sheriff's office." He looked around the room. "I'd like to know why you didn't put your name on it." The room had gone very still. Nathaniel stepped forward. Clara stayed where she was, half a step behind him, deliberate, letting him lead, because this was his community and his history and his land, and what she carried was support, not replacement. "I have something to show this room," Nathaniel said. He held up the summary document. "This is a record, dated, documented. It covers 3 months of events on my property and 2 properties that have already been sold. It includes surveying records filed by a Denver firm that appears in 3 separate land transactions in this county in the last 12 years, all of them resulting in sales that the original owners did not want to make." He looked at Hale. Hale's comfortable expression had thinned. It was still there, but it had the quality of something being held in place by effort. "I'm not making accusations in this room tonight," Nathaniel said. "I'm making a record available. Anyone who wants to read it can. Sheriff Bray has a copy. The county land office has a copy. And 3 of my neighbors," he nodded toward Garrett, toward Darcy Fenn, standing near the far wall, toward the young Mercer who stood beside her, "have independent accounts of similar approaches made to their families." The room was absolutely silent now. Clara looked at Hale. He was looking at her, she realized. Not at Nathaniel, not at the documents. At her. She held his gaze. He was the first to look away. The noise that came back into the room after that was different from the noise before. It had a different quality, the sound of people recalibrating, of the weight of opinion shifting in the way that it does when a story that was solid starts to crack under the pressure of something more detailed and more real. Mabel Greer said, loud enough to carry, "I'd like to read that document." 3 other people said the same, almost simultaneously. Hale left before the food was served. His 2 legal-looking men went with him, and the departure was quiet, too quiet. The kind of exit that understands it has miscalculated and is already planning the next approach. Clara watched him go and felt no victory in it, or not much, just the particular exhaustion of a fight that wasn't over but had turned. Nathaniel came back to stand beside her. "That wasn't a defeat," he said quietly. "Not for him. Not yet." "No," she agreed. "But it was a start." Rose appeared at her elbow with a plate of corn cake and the specific urgency of a 7-year-old who has decided that an adult needs feeding. "You haven't eaten anything," she said, with the accusatory tone of someone who has been watching. Clara took the plate. Eliza appeared on her other side, not offering anything, just present, the way she was present now. Close enough to be included, too proud to ask for it. "Is it over?" Eliza asked. "Not entirely," Clara said honestly. Eliza accepted this with a nod. She'd inherited her father's preference for truth over comfort, which Clara had come to appreciate deeply. "But we're still here," Rose said, with the straightforward confidence of a child who has decided a thing is true. Clara looked at them, both of them. This complicated, guarded, gradually opening pair of girls who had been handed a stranger and were slowly, imperfectly, with all the false starts and tested limits that real things required, beginning to make her into something else. "Yes," Clara said. "We're still here." The lamp-lit room moved around them, loud and ordinary and real, and the night outside was dark and wide and full of the things that hadn't been resolved yet, and none of that was finished. But this moment, the plate in her hand and the girls on either side of her, and the man who had just told a room full of his neighbors the truth, this moment was real, and it was hers. She ate the corn cake. It was good. Hale made his last move 11 days after the social. Clara had known something was coming. Not because she had specific information. Dawes had heard nothing. Garrett had heard nothing. Even Mabel Greer, who functioned as a kind of early warning system for the town's mood, had reported unusual quiet on Hale's end. And that quiet was itself the signal. Men like him didn't go silent because they'd given up. They went silent because they were finishing something. The document arrived by courier on a Thursday morning, addressed to Nathaniel, formal and thick with the weight of legal language. Clara was in the kitchen when Nathaniel brought it in. He set it on the table without opening it and looked at it the way you look at something you've been expecting and didn't want to arrive. "Open it," she said. He did. It was a formal challenge to the Silverleaf water rights, filed through a Denver legal firm, citing the addendum in the county land records as the basis for a claim that the original title contained an unresolved mineral and water survey discrepancy that rendered the current rights documentation incomplete. It was thorough and it was expensive, the kind of document that took months to prepare and a great deal of money to file, which meant Hale had been preparing it long before the town meeting, long before the social, long before any of the recent events had played out. He'd had this ready. Everything else had been noise, or a test, or both. Nathaniel read it twice. Then he put it down and stood at the kitchen window with his back to her for a long moment. "He built this the whole time," he said. "Yes," she said, "while he was coming to the ranch, while he was talking at meetings, while his people were walking our fence line at night." His voice was level, and that meant the anger was somewhere deep below the level where it showed. He already had this. "He always had this," she said. "The rest was pressure, to make you tired, to make you doubt, to make selling feel easier than fighting. If that had worked, he wouldn't have needed to file it." He turned from the window. "It didn't work." "No," she said. "It didn't." He looked at the document on the table. "Can we fight this?" "Yes," she said. "But we need the right lawyer, not county. Denver, someone who knows property litigation at this level." She'd been thinking about this since the moment she'd identified the addendum in Pruitt's office. She'd known this was where it was heading. "And we need the pattern documentation. Every property, every irregularity, everything we've gathered," she filed with the court alongside our response. Not as a counteraccusation, as context. Context that makes it very difficult for a judge to look at this challenge in isolation. "That could take months," he said. "It could," she said. "Are you prepared for months?" He looked at her directly. "Are you?" She picked up the document and read it through herself, carefully, marking the specific passages that referenced the addendum language. "I'm not going anywhere," she said without looking up. "If that's what you're asking." He was quiet for a moment. "It's what I was asking," he said. She finished reading. She set the document down. "Write to your bank contact in Denver today. Ask for a referral to a property litigation attorney, specifically someone who has worked against consolidated land acquisition. That's a narrow field, but it exists." She paused. "And tell Bray. He needs to know this has been filed before he hears it from someone else." Nathaniel was already reaching for paper. What followed was not swift or clean or satisfying in the way that resolutions in stories sometimes are. It was slow and expensive and frequently frustrating, the way real fights are when the person on the other side has resources and patience and no particular conscience about how they use either. The Denver attorney was a woman named Frances Aldrich, which surprised Nathaniel and didn't surprise Clara at all. She was 53, direct to the point of abruptness, and she read their full documentation package in one sitting and then looked up and said, "You've done most of my preliminary work for me. Who put this together?" Nathaniel nodded at Clara. Aldrich looked at her with an expression of professional assessment. "Have you done this before?" "I watched someone fail to do it," Clara said. "I paid attention." "Good instinct," Aldrich said. "Most people learn too late that the document trail is the whole battle." She filed their response within 3 weeks. The response included the pattern documentation, Silverleaf, the Abbotts, the Mercers, Darcy Fenn's property, a fifth property they'd identified through Aldrich's own research in the Denver court records, where an identical addendum had been filed 8 years earlier under the same surveying firm. 5 properties, the same language, the same method, the same firm, which Aldrich traced through 2 corporate consolidations to a holding company that listed Victor Hale as a silent partner. That was the thread that unraveled it. It took 4 months from the filing of the challenge to the day a judge in Denver reviewed the full record and issued a preliminary finding that the addendum in question showed evidence of fraudulent insertion into the county land records and was not a valid basis for a water rights challenge. The case was referred to a special prosecutor for criminal investigation into the surveying fraud. Nathaniel got the letter on a Tuesday in February, when the ground outside was frozen and the cottonwoods were bare, and the kitchen smelled like the bread Clara made every Tuesday, because Rose had decided Tuesday bread was the best bread and had constructed an elaborate theory about why this was true involving the temperature of the morning air, which was not scientifically sound but which Clara had decided not to argue with. He read the letter at the table. He read it twice, the way he read things that mattered. Then he put it down. "It's over?" Rose asked. She'd been doing her letters at the other end of the table, so Clara had been teaching her twice a week for the past 3 months, and she was faster at it than either of them had expected. "The water rights part," Nathaniel said. "The criminal case will go on for a while yet." "But our land is safe?" Eliza asked. She was in the doorway, pretending she hadn't been listening, which was a habit she had not entirely broken. "Our land is safe," Nathaniel said. The word "our" was not something he'd used before in quite that way, and it landed differently than Clara expected. Not as a grand statement, but as something matter-of-fact, something that had already become true before he'd said it. Eliza looked at the doorframe for a moment. Then she said, "Good," and went back to whatever she'd been doing, which was her version of relief. Rose went back to her letters. Clara poured more coffee and didn't say anything, which was how she handled the moments that were too full for talking. Hale did not come back to Harding Creek. The criminal investigation moved slowly, as they do, but it moved. Depositions, subpoenas, the careful assembly of a record that would eventually result, almost 2 years later, in a settlement that required Hale to divest his county holdings and pay restitution to the families who had sold under coercive conditions. The Abbotts came back. The Mercers chose to stay where they'd resettled, but they got their money. Darcy Fenn kept her land and her paperwork and eventually hired a young man from town to help her manage it, which was a practical solution that she described as not romantic in any way, which made Clara like her considerably. The surveying firm was dissolved. The holding company was dissolved. The 2 men who'd come with Hale to the social were identified as attorneys who lost their licenses in the subsequent proceedings. Clara followed all of it because she had that habit now, and because she understood that you don't stop paying attention just because the immediate danger has passed. She kept the files. She organized them properly, in a wooden box that Nathaniel made for her during one of the long February evenings, which was the first time he'd made something with his hands since before his wife had died. He presented it without ceremony, setting it on the kitchen table and saying, "For your documents," as though he'd made it for entirely practical reasons. She ran her hand along the smooth edge of it, Osage orange, like Rose's carved horse. Hard wood, built to last. "Thank you," she said. "It's a box," he said. "I know what it is," she said. He sat down at the table. They were alone in the kitchen. The girls were in bed. Mrs. Higgins had long since gone to her room. Dawes had closed up the barn an hour ago. The lamp was low and the fire was settling, and outside the February cold pressed at the windows with the particular thoroughness of a Colorado winter. "I've been trying to say something for a while," Nathaniel said. "I know," she said. "You know?" "You do the thing with the pencil when you're working up to something. Pick it up, put it down, pick it up." He looked at his hands. "I didn't know I did that." "Eliza does it too," she said. "With the spoon at dinner." He almost smiled. She'd hate knowing that. "I haven't told her." He was quiet for a moment. The fire settled. "I want this to be real," he said. "What's between us? I know how it started. The arrangement, the letters, the practical necessity of it. I know that's where it started." He looked at her. "I don't want that to be where it stays." Clara looked at him across the table. She thought about the letter she'd written to the advertisement, the careful, measured language she'd used, the things she'd listed about herself that were true, and the things she'd left out because they were too raw to put in a letter to a stranger. She thought about the train platform and the worn suitcase, and the way she'd stood on that platform and thought, "This is the last chance you get, so don't waste it on being afraid." "It's already moved," she said, "from where it started." "I know, but I want to say it plainly." He'd said that to her once before, about plain speaking, and here he was doing it himself. "I love you." That's what I've been working up to saying for approximately 6 weeks. She looked at him for a long moment. The lamp. The wooden box with its smooth Osage orange edge. The man who'd driven through dangerous night roads when she was sick and stood up in a room full of his neighbors and told the truth and made a box for her papers without calling it anything more than a box. I know that too, she said. Is that all you're going to say? No, she said. I love you too. I've been less disciplined about it than you. I stopped being able to pretend otherwise sometime around the town meeting. He looked at her with the unguarded expression she'd only seen a few times, the one that was just him without the management of it. What stopped you saying so? The situation, she said. Everything that needed to get done first. And now it's done. Enough of it, she said. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His hand was rough from years of work and warm from the kitchen fire, and she turned hers over and held it, which was the simplest thing and the most true. They sat like that for a while, with the fire burning down and the winter pressing at the glass, and neither of them needed to say anything more about it. Spring came the way it always did in Colorado, late and argumentative, with 2 false starts and a snowstorm in April that dumped 8 inches overnight and melted in 3 days. The salvias came back in the garden, stronger than the year before. Rose declared this personally significant. Eliza said it was just plants doing what plants do, and then spent 20 minutes one Saturday helping Clara clear the beds around them, which was its own kind of agreement. The school that Clara started was not a formal thing. It began with Rose's letters at the kitchen table and expanded by degrees. Eliza started coming with geometry questions that her father had been answering but could now answer better. And then the daughter of one of the ranch hands started coming on Tuesday mornings, and then 2 more children from neighboring properties whose families couldn't get them to the town school reliably in winter. By the time the salvias bloomed in June, there were 7 children at the kitchen table on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, and Mrs. Higgins had rearranged the kitchen schedule around it with a grumbling efficiency that was her particular form of approval. Clara was not a trained teacher, she made that clear. She knew what she knew, and she worked from that, and she found, in the doing of it, that what she knew was considerably more than she'd given herself credit for. Her father's insistence on reading everything, every contract, every deed, every newspaper, every letter, had given her a breadth that she'd always thought of as circumstantial rather than valuable. It turned out to be both. Darcy Fenn sent her a letter in June that said, among other things, my neighbor's boy couldn't read his own name when he started coming to you in January, and he read me a passage from a newspaper last week. Whatever you think you're doing it. Clara put the letter in the wooden box. It was a Saturday in late June, warm enough that the front door stood open all morning when Eliza came to Clara with the journal. Not to show her the contents, that was private, and Clara had never asked. She came with the journal closed and held against her chest, and the expression of someone who has decided to cross a distance they've been standing at the edge of for a long time. I've been writing about this year, Eliza said, since you came. I know you write, Clara said. I didn't know what about. Everything. She paused. At first I wrote about why you were going to leave, all the reasons. She looked at the journal. I kept adding to that list, and then I started writing about other things. Different reasons? Clara asked. Reasons you might stay, Eliza said. She said it quickly, like getting past the hard part fast made it easier. And then I stopped writing about reasons at all. I just started writing about what happened each day, because I wanted to remember it. Clara looked at her. This serious, self-contained, imperfectly armored girl who guarded everything fiercely and had been slowly, stubbornly choosing to let her in. That's good writing, Clara said. Writing what happened rather than what you think about it. Is it? It's harder, actually. Anyone can write what they think. Writing what happened honestly requires you to look at things clearly, including the parts that make you uncomfortable. Eliza considered this. Some of the things I wrote at the beginning aren't very kind, she said, about you. That was honest too, Clara said, for where you were then. Eliza looked at her. Are you always this, she searched for the word, reasonable about things? No, Clara said. I'm very unreasonable about certain things. I just try to pick them carefully. Eliza almost smiled. She'd been doing that more, almost smiling and occasionally following through on it. Papa's different, she said, since you came. You know that. He's not different, Clara said. He's more himself. Eliza thought about that. Yes, she said slowly. That's right, actually. She held the journal a little less tightly. I'm glad you stayed, she said, which cost her something. Clara could see it, the way saying a true thing always costs something when you're not used to saying it. "I'm glad I stayed too," Clara said. "I'm glad every day." Eliza nodded, which was her version of the longer response she wasn't ready to give. She went back to her room, journal in hand, and Clara heard her footsteps on the stairs and thought about how much sound a house could hold when it was finally full of the right things. The ceremony was small because both of them wanted it that way. Nathaniel had offered more than once to do it properly, with the full assembly of the county and a celebration that matched the scale of what Silverleaf represented. Clara had said no each time, gently but clearly. What they'd built didn't need a performance. It had been witnessed already by the people who mattered in the daily evidence of a year lived honestly. It was Garrett who performed the civil ceremony, which was within his authority as a county commissioner. They stood in the front room of the ranch house on a Saturday morning in July with Dawes and Mrs. Higgins and Garrett and his wife as witnesses, and the girls standing side by side. Rose in the red ribbon, Eliza in her best dress with her arms at her sides this time rather than folded. It took 12 minutes. Afterward, Rose asked if there was going to be cake, and there was, because Mrs. Higgins had made one without being asked, which was the most eloquent thing she'd done all year. Eliza, later, when the small gathering had mostly dispersed and the afternoon had settled into its ordinary rhythms, came and stood next to Clara at the kitchen window, where Clara was watching the garden. "Now it's official," Eliza said. "It was already real," Clara said. "Now it has a date." Eliza stood there for a moment. "Mama Clara," she said very quietly, and the way she said it was tentative, trying it out, which was exactly right. Not an announcement, but a question. Not a gift given, but a door opened. Clara felt it move through her in the way the real things do. Not the dramatic wave she'd expected, but something quieter and more total, like ground settling under you after a long time of finding your footing on uncertain terrain. "Yes," she said. Just that. And it was enough. What Clara knew, and the end of a year that had unmade her old life completely, was this: belonging is not a thing that is handed to you. It's not in a document, not in a ceremony, not in a name. It's in the accumulation of Tuesday mornings with children learning their letters. It's in a wooden box built without ceremony to hold the papers that saved what mattered. It's in a 7-year-old's theory about bread and a girl's journal and a man who reaches across a table in a winter kitchen and holds your hand without requiring it to mean more than it does. She had come to Silverleaf with one worn suitcase and no certainty, and she had been afraid, and she had been doubted, and there had been weeks when the fear of losing everything again sat so close that she could feel it in her chest when she woke in the dark. That fear had not been weakness. That was the thing she understood now, that she hadn't understood when she was watching her father fight and lose. The fear is not the problem. The fear is just information. What you do while you're afraid is the whole question. She had stayed. She had worked. She had kept records and asked hard questions and refused to be made smaller than she was, and none of that had been graceful or certain or anything like the stories people tell afterward. It had been slow and imperfect and full of wrong guesses and corrected courses and mornings when she'd stood in the kitchen before anyone else was awake and had to find, again, the reason to keep going. The reason had changed over time. At first it was necessity. She had nowhere else to go. Then it was stubbornness. She was not going to let a man like Hale or a town's dismissal or two girls' grief or her own fear drive her out of something real. And then it became what it was now, which was simpler and harder to explain. She stayed because this was hers. Not by entitlement, but by the specific labor of having built it day by day, with her own hands and her own insistence on being honest about what she was and what she wanted. You can't be given that. You can only do the work until the place is real. Silverleaf was real. The cottonwoods in the yard were real. The salvias with their small purple flowers were real. And the children at the kitchen table on Tuesday mornings were real. And the man who fell asleep in his office over land surveys and who had carved a horse from hard yellow wood for his daughter and who had stood in a room full of people and told the truth when the easier thing was silence. He was real. And she was real here, in this place, in this life that had started as a last chance and had become something she would not trade. The cottonwoods moved in the summer evening. Inside, someone, Rose almost certainly, knocked something off a shelf and said, "Uh-oh," in the particular tone of a child hoping no one heard. And from somewhere further in the house, Nathaniel's voice said, "What was that?" And Rose's voice said nothing, which was transparently untrue. And Clara heard Eliza laugh, an actual, unguarded laugh, the kind she was getting better at, and the sound of it moved through the house like something that had been waiting a long time to be let out. Clara turned from the window. She went inside into the noise and the warmth and the ordinary, irreplaceable life of it, and she closed the door behind her.